From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We have a great show for you guys today. Spent most of the week at the RPT convention. We're also talking about the California jungle election primary fraud. Many of you have seen this information, of course, but we'll go in depth on what it means in California and what happened in the LA mayor's race and how the conservative can be 9 points ahead of the number three candidate, who's also a radical liberal, 9 points ahead on election night, and end up magically not making the runoff. The top two go, and they're both liberals. It takes 6, 7, 8 days, and just magically enough votes show up in California. We're also talking about Republican Party of Texas convention, a so-called secret retreat that wasn't so secret by the governor and the Speaker of the Texas House, and the instrumental engagement of the casino lobby in that retreat, and the Texas Historical Commission and the SOS, what it means on these transitions and the importance of these appointments by the governor and how they affect us, specifically closing the primary, trying to keep Democrats out. So Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We have a great show coming at you today. Hold tight. We're going to get rolling on all of these. Make sure you're following us across all social media platforms, Politics with the Big Dogs. Each of these radio shows is also converted into a podcast, many of them with more content, and loaded across every place you would expect. YouTube podcasts, Spotify podcasts, Apple, just about anywhere you can download a podcast, you'll find Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you're following it. Make sure you're pulling down. Subscribe if you can. And if we can get enough time, we're definitely going to speak about the Carmelo Anthony trial and the debacle of the witnesses following the verdict.
More with Anthony Holm coming up in just a minute. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. While you're there, make sure you listen to our previous episodes of Politics with the Big Dogs. Politics with the Big Dogs is brought to you by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Got a question for Anthony Holm? Email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Now, more with Anthony Holm on Politics with the Big Dogs.
All right, folks. Again, there's just almost too much for us to get to. It's always so busy. There's just so much news being made. All of it I want to share with you, but we have limited time. So on this segment, we're going to talk about the gubernatorial and speaker-led retreat for Republican House members. So what happened recently was the governor and the Speaker of the Texas House had all the Republican House members, their consultants, many of their staff, and outside experts at a 2-day retreat. And effectively they said, hey, we're real concerned about the November election. Everybody has to run elections starting now, run campaigns starting now. And we're here to give you the benefit of our wisdom, our insight. Here's a whole bunch of polling we've done. Here's some messaging that you can do. Here are tactics. And you just can't wait until September to run a general election campaign because you could lose. That's the general narrative. I wasn't on hand. I've been to these things before. They happen most cycles. However, they're usually led, my observation is more by the governor's political staff than the speaker's team, and they happen much later in time, August, September, as I recall. But nonetheless, this one happened, and it was an overnight retreat, and there were just legions of people. But what was really conspicuous to me, I mean, number one, I'm glad they're doing it, right? Like, we need to be organized. You need to be thinking about the ticket. And time is the piece that everybody mismanages in campaigns. There's really only a few inputs: money, labor, and time is the one that you can't replicate, right? You can always raise more money. In theory, you can buy more labor, but it's time that erodes. So I praise their leadership in getting it done. I think, frankly, it was mostly the House Speaker driving the train on this one. But nonetheless, so they go and they have this 2-day retreat. What struck me, because I've not been familiar, or I don't recall them at least, bringing quote-unquote institutional donors to these retreats. So best as I can tell, and I've now talked to a number of attendees, that there were 3 buckets of money that generally is tendered by the leadership, the governor and or the speaker. They're saying, hey, come to this retreat. It's 2 days. You got to take your campaign seriously. We want to see your plans. Submit plans weeks in advance. Submit budgets weeks in advance. There's 12 or so House members particularly targeted by the Democrats, but all of you need to run a strong race. And we, the party, are $50 to $60 million short of everything that we think should be spent in these races. Well, you know, of course, Dan Patrick's sitting on $35 million. Last I checked, the governor had like $100 million. He's probably raised $500 million or more in the last 12 or so years. The guy is just a fundraising machine. Of course, the speaker can raise many millions, and all of these members raise money. So it's conspicuous that the controlling party in Texas, led by the leaders, we've been in control top to bottom of Texas government for 30 years. We have unlimited donation amounts. In every seat, legislative seat, certainly, there are some limitations on this courts, but nonetheless in this legislators, and we're 50 to 60 million under budget. And by the way, hey members, your staffs, your political team, come to this 2-day retreat, and we're going to have a number of donors, or actually 3 buckets of donors for you, who in theory will save your campaigns by giving you the money that you need to defend yourself in November. One bucket of these donors were the casinos, predatory gambling, and they were permitted to give a presentation. Now, the casinos in Texas, and it's led primarily by Las Vegas Sands, which is the Venetian. The Venetian is a well-known casino hotel out of Las Vegas, though the Sands no longer owns that one. They own, as I understand it, 2 in China. Well, in 2021, the data that I'm looking at shows that the Venetian, the Sands, those are the same, interchangeable, hired 76 lobbyists. 76. A huge lobby team might be 14. Most lobby teams are 1 to 4 people. 76 lobbyists trying to pass predatory gambling in 2021. If I remember correctly, that is when there was a vote on the floor of the Texas House. And, of course, it was dead in the Senate, so all these House members took a terrible vote. Many of them supported predatory gambling, and then they just got eviscerated in their primaries. My data shows the Venetian alone has spent like $25 million in the last 4 years trying to elect Democrats or Republicans willing to allow predatory gambling in Texas. $25 million in PAC donations. 76 lobbyists in 2021 alone. 2023 and 2025 had many dozens. I don't think it was 76, but it was north of 40, north of 50. I mean, just everybody and their dog was part of the casino lobby in Austin. All these legions of lobbyists who do backroom deals, who, you know, they're the same ones opposing a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying. They're the same ones opposing tax cuts because they're lobbying for local governments. And they're also lobbying for predatory gambling. They want to build massive casinos in Texas. And the little out that they're using as well, it would require a constitutional amendment. So I'm actually not for casinos, but I am for people having a statewide vote. I think that's pretty much a cop-out, right? Like, just call it what it is. If you're opposed to gambling, then don't put it on the ballot. And if you're supportive of gambling, then take efforts to put it on the ballot and just move on. But what I'm really troubled about is that the governor and the speaker of the Texas House appear to be seen as, hey, House members, 88 Republican House members, come to this retreat. I know you don't have money, and I know that you're already nervous about November, and we're amping up that fear and telling you, oh, it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be so bad. You got to start months ahead of time. You've got to have so much more money, or we could lose. You could lose. And we don't have the cash that you need, but these guys do. They're the casinos. Go get it. We're going to put you all in a 2-day retreat overnight, have dinner, cocktails, meet, mingle, come to know each other. Don't worry, they're not going to ask you to vote for gambling. Like, that's insane. That's insane. So these so-called institutional donors, but I know legions of institutional donors beyond the casinos. In fact, they didn't even engage in Texas in any material fashion until 5 years ago. And then the next group was Texans for Lawsuit Reform. who was also on hand at this 2-day retreat. My understanding is they paid for a big chunk of it, perhaps all of it. Well, we all know TLR. They have been a longtime donor to Democrats and Republicans in Texas. It's over $6 million to Democrats. And what really irks me is they and their donor base are the ones who champion almost all of the rhinos. The vast majority of their money goes in opposing constitutional conservatives in Republican primaries. People like you and people like me. One of their mega donors to their PAC is a guy named John Now. We've talked about him before. He was the treasurer of Abbott's campaign at one point. He was the treasurer of Cornyn's campaign at one point. He personally donated over $8 million trying to defeat Ken Paxton. And we saw what happened in that. You know, as a sidebar, we got to talk about Cornyn's Liberation Day. But I want to say on this segment, at least for the next few minutes. And then a third pocket of funding was real conservatives, strong social conservatives like you and I. There was somebody there representing the ecosystem of social and movement conservatives, folks like you and I. So one third of the funding pool, at least in theory, who was on site at this big retreat were the casino, the predatory gambling interests out of Las Vegas and China. 1/3 of the so-called institutional donors who are going to help all these Republicans survive in November are Texans for Lawsuit Reform, TLR, the folks we've talked about a lot of times in the past who have obviously funded Democrats and the vast majority of funding of rhinos. And, you know, Speaker Strauss way back when and Dave Phelan way back when. But my rub is on policy. These are the guys that showed up and supported the vaccine mandate in corporate Texas. These are the folks who shill for insurance companies, who opposed Donald Trump, who said, hey, these 18-wheeler drivers who can't read or speak English, you got to get them off the road. They're unsafe. Whereas TLR tried to pass that bill, right, that said if they can't read or speak English and they crash into you, the jury can't automatically learn that information. Like, insane. And then 1/3, in theory, or at least the three legs of the funding stool that were presented at this retreat was social conservatives, material conservatives. Good. Hallelujah. But there are so many other people. And really, I want to know why the governor and the speaker aren't going and instructing these mega donors like John Now, who spent $8 million trying to defeat Ken Paxton, to spend at least $8 million trying to defeat Tallarico. John Now and others of the TLR ilk spent many millions trying to defeat strong constitutional conservatives like Mark DeRazio in San Antonio, a state rep who had formerly been chair of the Bexar County party that sanctioned then Speaker Strauss. I mean, that guy is as brave as it gets. They also spent, this TLR cabal also spent millions trying to defeat Mark LaHood, another constitutional conservative who was supported by Trump and Abbott, and took out a really moderate, probably the most moderate Republican in the Texas House in the primary cycle preceding this election. Yet TLR went after him. Andy Hopper, strong conservative from North Texas. They spent hundreds of thousands trying to defeat him in the primary. What I'm wondering is, rather than inviting the predatory gambling cabal into our tent, you know, look, they've got to go out and fight for their policies if they want to advance. And if they get it, they get it, as long as they win fair and square. But why are the governor and the speaker of the Texas House inviting the predatory gambling folks rather than just instructing the 5 gazillionaires who spent, 15, 18 million trying to defeat constitutional conservatives in the primary to spend at least 15, 18 million trying to defeat Democrats? It would close that gap instantly, right? Because DeRazio now has to overcome the millions that now John Now spent against him, that TLR spent against him in these silly primaries. The same with LaHood, the same with Hopper. Some of the most vulnerable Republicans in the tightest districts have to overcome these incredible spending attacks, just like now Paxton has to overcome over $125 million spent ravaging him the last 3 months. He's got to overcome that so he can defeat Tallarico. And he will, because Tallarico's a wingnut, right? There's no way around it. The guy opposes voter ID, no identification for voting, right? He says there's 6 sexes, not 2. Science has established this. Like, he's just going to get poured out. But why aren't the governor and the speaker, who are incredibly powerful, and all of these mega donors jump through hoops for him? I mean, heck, John Now, for example, combined over 12 million advancing rhino Republicans. He was the treasurer for the governor's campaign not that long ago. He was the treasurer for Cornyn's campaign. In fact, he is the chair of the Historical Society, which we'll speak about here in another segment, and have spoken about in another segment, that is advancing the LGBTQ plus agenda recently. I mean, it's just so shocking. Tell your people that they've got to spend at least that much trying to defeat Democrats. So what does this mean? Politics often becomes policy. Here's what I think it means. Bottom line, that the Texas House probably intends to advance a very significant vote to allow predatory gambling elections in Texas. I just think that is what all of this is signaling to us. So we're going to have to get through November, hold as many seats as we can. Right now, I'm not that worried about it. It's a 4-point generic D versus R. Unless that materially increases, it won't be the historical bloodbath that it often is when one party holds the White House, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. House. It's going to be a hard election, no way around that. But historically, that's a really vulnerable position for the party in power. And unless the generic spread gets much bigger, and there's plenty of time for that to occur, it won't be as bad as people fear or expect. But what's it mean? We're going to have to overcome November elections, and then we're going to have to defeat, probably, a bill on the House floor to allow predatory gambling in Texas. That's what it means for you, and that's what it means for me. And why? Because in part, the predatory gambling lobby was given a 2-day free-for-all, closed party pass, just you, the members, their consultants, and your checkbook to go have at it. That ought to tell us an awful lot about what is coming on policy. Will it pass the House? I don't know, but it might. Will it pass the Senate? I strongly doubt it, but we'll have to see what Dan Patrick does. He's been changing lately. You know, traditionally he's been totally opposed to it, and I think he'll be totally opposed to it again. But he surprised me on some of his positions in the last 3 or 4 years. He's not, as such, he's not the same conservative who took office, the lieutenant governor's office 12 years ago, from my perspective. We'll see. Like, he's still somebody we want, somebody we need, and a really strong advocate for policy, but we're just going to have to see what comes in the upcoming session. Okay, we got to move on to the next segment, but it's a natural transition there with John Now. So John Now, this uber-rich gazillionaire, roughly 80 years old from Houston, he owned the Budweiser, the Anheuser-Busch distributorships in Houston, and then ultimately, I think it's San Antonio. So he made $1 gazillion. He's been treasurer of Cornyn's campaign, treasurer of Abbott's campaign. Most recently donated $8 million opposing Paxton, advancing Cornyn, only to get routed. Also spent a couple $1 million trying to take out strong conservative House members, DeRazio, LaHood, and others. So the guy's a gazillionaire, a mega donor, and he happens to be the current chair of the Texas Historical Commission, appointed by Abbott. Okay, well, so what's the big deal about the Texas Historical Commission? And apparently that's one of this guy's passions, history. That's good. That's interesting. Well, what did they do? They recently unveiled an official Texas historical marker in Round Rock, Texas. Round Rock is just north of Austin in Williamson County, traditionally pretty conservative area. But they're recognizing that Round Rock Memorial. It's at a cemetery. And it's by the gravestone of Vander Clyde Broadway, who was a Round Rock native who became famous in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. And how did he become famous? He was doing, vaudeville. His stage name was Barbette, and he would dress up as a woman using the white powdered face and the wigs and everything that you'd expect from the 1920s and 30s. And he looked an awful lot like a woman. He was very feminine and small in stature, and he would do tricks on stage and swing and sing and do a full show, very erotic show, and then at the end unveil his body so that people would be shocked to know that he's a man. Oh my gosh, that's a man. And he became quite well known, particularly in Paris, dancing and presenting a show at the Moulin Rouge, and well known across Europe. Ultimately, apparently returned to Round Rock, Texas at the end of his life and passed away there. So the Texas Historical Commission, chaired by John Now, this mega donor of TLR and donor to Democrats and donor to all the rhinos actively trying to defeat conservatives, chairs this historical commission, close friend of Governor Abbott's, and it just went and did a official Texas historical marker in Round Rock to honor Barbette, one of the original cross-dressers. What's striking to me is who showed up for that and who is applauding it. And it's been celebrated by the LGBTQ plus community as a monumental event in Texas, right? Like one of the quotes on KXAN and also on Texas Scorecard, and thank you for our friends at Texas Scorecard for flagging this, bringing it to our attention. I would have missed it, I think, but for this. Quote, "It's almost like a breakthrough for a community that was thought to be so ultra-conservative for so many years," said Round Rock Pride founder Richard Parsons. So the founder of the Gay Pride Parade, or the LGBTQ plus Pride Parade in Round Rock, says it's a monumental breakthrough. In fact, the founder of the Gay Pride Parade in Round Rock said that Barbette was his inspiration for establishing that parade. And it's effectively it's about time that Texas Historical Commission finally honored one of the original cross-dressers. I am told anecdotally by others that at the event were men in drag and full performances, I believe, in a cemetery. Now, that is unconfirmed. That's secondhand, but I was told that. So I gotta ask, why is the governor's fully appointed commission signing off on this and thinking it's appropriate? And in particular, John Now, this gazillionaire out of Houston who was treasurer of the governor's campaign. And it takes us to another huge event that happened recently. The Texas Secretary of State, which is also an appointed position by the governor. And this is why these appointments are so important, folks. And the governor, he's made a bunch of appointments to courts, to the Secretary of State, and obviously to the Historical Commission that have not been in alignment with conservative values. So the Secretary of State, Jane Nelson, announced, hallelujah, that she's resigning from office in July. And I say hallelujah because Jane Nelson, no doubt at the behest of the governor and the establishment, opposed closing the primary. You and I and others, we've been fighting to close the Republican primary for years. Dade Phelan was reelected, 2 cycles ago, by flooding the primary runoff with Democrats. Trump came out against him. Many conservatives rallied against him, and it was Democrats. It was not even an open secret. They were just openly saying, hey, Democrats, come and vote, save Dade. And by, I don't even remember how many, a small handful of votes, he was reelected. So this has been an issue for cycles, right? Cornyn said something similar. He went into the runoff and went out in the public and said, hey, 18 million registered voters didn't vote in the primary. You can all vote in the runoff. Come out and vote. Well, that's a siren's call, right? To Democrats, come and help me. I know I'm going to lose. And now the Texas Secretary of State went out and hired an independent law firm. In fact, I think it's a few law firms, and used our dollars, our tax funds, yours and mine, to litigate against the Republican Party of Texas, which was trying to close our primary. So you got to register as a Republican, and you can only vote if you're a registered Republican, period. Well, these incumbents, these establishment folks don't want that because they were all elected under this regime, and they fear giving you and I more power. And why do they think we'll get more power? Because moderates, Democrats, folks who like to vote in both I vote for Democrats as one one voter, but I've got to participate in this Republican primary because it's the lesser of evils, right? So we want to stop those people from coming into our primary. I'm saying, no, you got to be an actual conservative vote in here. And if that happened, so many of these rhinos who just magically can't produce tax cuts for us, who just magically defend the big insurance companies in Texas instead of you and I, who just, these rhinos who just magically shrug their shoulders. I don't know how we're going to mandate a COVID vaccine in Texas, but we need it. It's an emergency. Those COVID emergency orders were kept in place for like 2.5 years. People just aren't paying attention. You and I have to focus on these big issues when the appointments matter because they create a domino effect. So Governor Abbott, who appointed the Secretary of State, had the Secretary of State sue the Republican Party of Texas and say you can't close the primaries. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, who generally would defend in litigation the state of Texas and its agency, said, no, I think you're wrong, state of Texas, Secretary of State, the appointed position, that is, shares in office with the governor, shares a door, shares a wall. They're right there in the Capitol. I think you're wrong. I can't defend it. I actually support the Republican Party of Texas. They can close their primary. That wasn't enough for the Secretary of State's office, appointed exclusively controlled by the governor, to act or to stand down. She went and used your tax dollars to hire all of these high-dollar civil litigators and stop us from closing the primary. In part because the John Nows of the world wanted to spend $8 million trying to defeat conservatives, trying to advance rhinos, spend millions of dollars trying to defeat conservative House members and replace them with their rhinos. And they know, these mega donors, and TLR, who does this, who always advances the moderate, the rhino, instead of the constitutional conservative, because they can't control a constitutional conservative. The constitutional conservative actually cares about policy and reads the bills. They know if the primaries are closed, their money becomes less valuable. Right now, you and I are winning many of these races. In fact, the last cycle, we won them all. There were like 11 constitutional conservatives targeted by TLR, and we whooped them top to bottom. Won most of those races 70-30. Folks like you and I said no more. But they'll be even less effective. And by the way, this was a one-off this cycle. Most cycles, they win. They just have overwhelming amounts of money, and they know it. These guys all have hundreds of millions, and they can write a check for $5 million and flood the field. And the folks who you and I fight for just get outspent and overwhelmed. More often than not, that's what's happened. So these profile of gazillion-dollar rhino donors and Democrat donors and moderate policy advocates fear more than anything us closing the primary because they know they can't beat us in a general. Their only move to make is in the primary. So these appointments matter, folks. And the last little nugget that I want to add to this isn't an appointment, but I want to make sure that everybody saw it. John Cornyn, after he was defeated by Ken Paxton in the runoff, has been in Washington, D.C. smiling. And what did he call that Tuesday election defeat that day? He said, that's my liberation day. He is free to vote how he wants. Wow. That's why Washington, D.C. and John Now and the Bush machine wanted Cornyn back for another 6 years. Because left to his own devices to vote his conscience, we don't have voter ID. We don't have SAVE Act. Democrats control the filibuster. We don't have a reduction in the growth of government. We have moderation. We have gun control. We have clearly what his core values are. Clearly. We just probably wasted 24 years for a Texas senator to effect change by electing John Cornyn. I am more struck by that now than I ever have been. I've always thought he was a pretty gracious fella. Yeah, he's much more moderate than I, but generally I believed he would do the right thing. But now that he's walking around D.C., smiling to the camera, saying, Liberation Day is here and trying to run amok. Wow. That really shows just about everything we need to know. And we'll have to see what happens in January when we send a conservative to the Senate in that seat.
Love what you're hearing? Find all of our shows at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and send in your questions. politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks, we've got to move on to our next segment here. I'll bet many of you saw, heard, followed at least somewhat the California primary elections. And of course, California has what's called the jungle primary. Many of you may know this, but let's make sure we level up on information. So what does that mean? It means there aren't party designations. For example, the Los Angeles mayor's race, which is the one that has gotten the most attention of late, and President Trump and others on Truth Social and on X have been bashing it pretty aggressively. And so let's look at why. I think there's some merit to it, right? I know there's some merit to it. They haven't actually proven that the whole thing was fraudulent, but there's got to be some fraud. So let's talk about what happens in California. Basically, there were three leading contenders for the mayor of LA. The incumbent, Miss Bass, Mayor Bass, activist liberal, even more liberal individual who was a woman who was elected as part of the socialist wave to city council. Miss Rahman, Raman, and then a so-called conservative, I think guy identifies more as a Republican than anything else, a TV celebrity, Spencer Pratt. Well, on election night, Bass was number one, Pratt was number two, and Nithya Rahman was a distant third being about 9.5 points. But what California does for their elections, every registered voter, number one, is super easy to register, right? You don't have to have ID. They accept all sorts of crazy prescription label torn off as your name, being eligible, your gymnasium ID, credit card. It's so easy to register to vote fraudulently there that no doubt there are many, and in fact we have lots of examples of fraudulent voters having voted who don't exist in California. They don't quell their voter rolls very often, so a whole bunch of dead people who were legally registered and probably were legally voting but have passed away are getting ballots. So every single registered voter in the state in California for an election gets a ballot. And it's a vote by mail. All they have to do is fill here's who I vote for. And if it's postmarked on or before Election Day, it gets counted no matter when it comes in. But it's not only postmarked. You can drop those ballots off in person. And if a voter writes, "This is Election Day," but it has no ballot and it comes in late, then it is counted. So here we are, many, many days after the election, and they still weren't sure who was going to be the top two in the jungle primary to go. So it's no D's, it's no R's. The top two voters, whether they're the same party, different parties, unaffiliated with a party, they will both advance to the November general election. So Pratt, the conservative, or, the LA conservative, but he had been very aggressively attacking the radical liberal mayor, looked like he was going to sail into the November election, and then 8, 9, 10 days afterward, it was upended. And, oh no, actually you're out and Miss Rahman is in. And why? Because all of these ballots came in late. When we say late, we're talking about days late, handwritten, notes on them. And what does California do? And this is a trend in many of the states, and obviously Gavin Newsom's quite proud of this, but it's just 100% fraudulent, right? There's no way around it. So what does California do? It allows organizations to go and collect ballots. So everybody gets mailed a ballot who's on the voter rolls. I remind us that John Cornyn said, "Hey, 18 million registered voters in Texas. You're all eligible. You didn't participate in the runoff. You're eligible in the primary, you're all eligible to vote for me in the runoff." And what does that mean? It's a siren's call, obviously, to all the Democrats. You can come and vote, and that's why we have to close the primary. But California is different in that One house may get 11 ballots because people were last registered there, even if it was 3 elections ago. And all anybody has to do is fill in their choice, and then they can mail it back in. They can give it to a union activist leader for collection, because California allows groups to go out and collect these ballots and return them, quote unquote, on behalf of the voter. So what happens, right? Like a union activist or a team of them go and hit an old folks home, or go and hit an area that has a lot of apartments and collects ballots for them to return them. Who signed them? Who knows? Were they signed? Who knows? Who filled in the candidate of choice? Who knows? But here's what we know. We know that liberal candidates get these waves of ballots long after the election night actually happens, and almost always they just magically are enough to move the liberals ahead of any conservative, or ahead of even a more conservative liberal who was leading, right? The top two go into the November election. So the system is organized and structured in a way to make it really, really easy to cheat. What are some of those examples, right? Of course, it wasn't state prosecutors. It was federal prosecutors who indicted a California woman because she was paying homeless people to register to vote, because you have same-day registration. You don't need IDs. And so there's this woman just handing out registration, voter regs to folks on Skid Row, homeless individuals, and giving them money and saying, oh, you can use my address, or you can use my old address. Here's the address to put in it. So all those ballots get sent there, and then she picks them up, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 100, and they're returned. She pled guilty. Hasn't been sentenced yet, but it took the feds to do this. Another really strong individual who got prosecuted, but she did it intentionally. This woman in Southern California, she registered her dog to vote and submitted ballots on behalf of the dog. One of them was counted, and one was caught and tossed. So there's a 50% fraudulent rate. She did it obviously to prove a point and said, of course I did this, but is now prosecuted as a result of it. So when you have a system that allows anybody to register, and it doesn't check whether they're here legally, whether they're a U.S. citizen, you can use your gym card, you can tear off a sticker, the ID sticker from a prescription, a discarded prescription bottle, and that's going to qualify as your ID, and you get a ballot in that name, tell them where to send it, and then you can vote for that person. We got to think this happens quite often. Oh, and by the way, if it's a super late arriving, as long as they wrote on mail sent on election day, even though it wasn't even mailed, it's accepted. So the other potential fraud, I got to say potential here, is that on election night, one can see, oh, my third place candidate is trailing by 9 points or so, but we think there's still 40% of the votes out. Well, we need roughly this many more ballots. It's just a math problem, so that my third place candidate, for example, Councilwoman Rahman, the crazy liberal activist who's now in the November, she was 8 or 9 points down on election day behind Spencer Pratt. We need this many ballots. Suddenly, magically, that many ballots and then some show up, whether they're hand delivered by union activists or they're hand delivered by Acorn, the old Acorns of the world, the so-called community leaders, like President Obama was early in his career, vote harvesting, community activist, organizer, professional paid organizers to make sure all these folks who never vote or may not be here legally or frankly might be paid just to get registered so they can give big batches. And when you're doing a race like LA mayor, it has to be done on massive scale. But when you're doing some of these down ballot races, 200, 300, 400 votes make a difference. You know it. I know it because we're seeing it at our school boards, even some of our state rep runoffs. But our smaller community, county commissioners, depending on what county you're in, like some of these down ballot races, it makes a big difference. A couple hundred votes can change everything. So this is a system that is structured for fraud. There's just no way around it. It is structured to ensure that there is no clear line of sight on election night. And if anybody needs a certain number of ballots, there's an opportunity for those to be returned. And then the other thing that's similar to this that I believe is worth talking about in this vein is California and Oregon and some of these other states. They have been losing union members, right? They have very aggressive unions. In theory, we have outlawed unions in Texas, but they all exist as associations. So, it's kind of like outlawing DEI that we've talked about here. It just is unrealistic. We're still building DEI and racial mandates and quotas into the budget, for example, right? We talked about that in the past. So the Democrats, unions in a number of these states, New York, Oregon, California in particular, or Hawaii, are very aggressive, very strong, and have all sorts of carve-out state laws defending and protecting them. Well, activists like you and I have organized what is just honest communications with union members and said, hey, your union is spending like 99% of your dues on these crazy liberal activists, and you don't have to join them. Or teachers often say, I'm only a member of the teacher union so that I can get this type of insurance. Well, conservatives have been offering that type of insurance, and union members have been opting out, right? Because it's a couple $1,000s a year of their paycheck that they're recovering. States have been passing laws to ban this, right? So Oregon was the most conspicuous because the guy that I actually had some overlap with in the years past has been so successful. And just legions of people, hundreds and thousands, have been opting out of the union. That's good for the free market, right? So Oregon passed a law that a think tank of nonprofit who is notifying workers of their rights that you don't have to pay union fees, they're opening up these nonprofits to legal action, right? By saying, hey, you are falsely impersonating a union representative. And as a result, you can be fined and liable, civilly liable and fined $1,000 per incident. So what they're trying to do is stop it, right? How does this happen in practice? You have folks setting up these nonprofits and conservative leaning C4s and think tanks who are communicating, sending a cardstock, 6x9 explanatory, kind of almost like a campaign mail piece that says, you're a member of the union, you're paying this much in dues, you can opt out. You have the right to opt out. Many people automatically, if they get a job in a certain industry, depending on the state, are opted into the union. You can save this much money, and you can have all of these protections anyway. Well, states are moving and changing state laws to say, well, that could be communicated like misrepresented or misunderstood by the recipient, by the union member, and they might think that it is a communication from their union itself, and that is fraudulent event, and we're going to put damages on it and allow the attorney generals of these states to prosecute you. They're just trying to shut it down because it's so effective. People are opting out of the unions. So these are the type of activities that happen in conjunction with this level of voter fraud. And once it gets enough momentum, as you can see, it's almost impossible to unwind. California, roughly 40% of the electorate are Republicans, right, and conservatives, and they don't want that craziness. But you just can't unwind it because all of these activist liberal ecosystems are intertwined and work together. So when you have unions saying, hey, state, give me protection so I don't lose my people, change the law and stop speech and stop allowing conservatives to tell our members how badly we're serving them and the money that we're taking from them. And don't worry, we are going to go and collect ballots on behalf of favorable candidates, and we'll make sure that those ballots get returned and the voters are voting for the right people. And then a week after an election, it goes from a conservative having a 9-point lead over the third candidate rather, so that the conservative would be a choice for LA mayor to magically it's the incumbent LA mayor and a more radical activist who get number 1 and 2, and the conservative just missed out and is pushed down to number 3. Oh, shucks, I'm sorry. You got close. Try again another election cycle. So these things work together. The unions, the liberal activists, the loose, that's a very gracious word, frankly, the loose regulations around voting in California are creating the outcomes, right? And California chooses not to investigate in any material fashion election fraud, so it takes the feds to expose it, actually catch a woman signing up all these folks living on the street and having those ballots voted to mailed to a place where she can collect them. Or this woman in Southern California saying, these are so absurd, I can register my dog, and doing it. And then actually voting on behalf of the dog just to approve. So the dog apparently got 2 ballots, mailed both back, and one got accepted and was counted in an election. They had no idea, they being the leaders and the elected officials in California, until this woman self-reported. I mean, that's shocking, right? Just shocking. You can have bands of people who are working for a single candidate go around and, quote unquote, help collect and return ballots. Fraud on its face, and it's institutional fraud structured that way. So that's what's been going on, and it's part of the big ballot security election fraud fight that we're having nationally. And about 18 or so states have some version of what California is doing, what I just described. Now, California is often a thought leader in fraud and waste. And this seems to be the case, obviously, with this ballot effort that I'm describing. But a number of states, all of which are blue, have the same or similar regulations that allow just rampant fraud and abuse and choosing of winners. Because okay, I've got to go and find 38,000 ballots in the next 4 or 5 days that can, quote unquote, come in and were mailed or sent or signed by Election Day to ensure that my candidate goes from missing out in the November general election to bumping from 3rd to 2nd so that she's in and nobody has an opportunity to vote for conservative. That's what we're talking about. So if you're just tuning in, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you're following us across all social media channels. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all of these shows, and frankly, with more content, are loaded into podcasts. We have a limitation of time on our radio shows. You also sign up, please, politicswiththebigdogs.com for our weekly newsletter. You can stay ahead of the news, stay ahead of these episodes. And then if you're able, please join us, sign a petition to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. You can sign on our website, politicswithbigdogs.com, and we will send it directly to your state representative and state senator for you. We've got to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. We've talked about this in the past. If you're new to the show, it is permitted in Texas to use your tax monies, local levels, a mud board, a city, a county, a school board, whatever, and they go and they hire these third-party lobbyists in Austin who have no association with the community. And those lobbyists advocate with your tax dollars almost always against your interest. It's a $250 million fraud that's been going on for a number of years in Texas. And effectively, all these lobbyists who hang out with the members and take them to drinks and dinners and Spurs games, all this, you know what happens. It's disgusting. They say, look, your local community hired me. They want to make sure that they still have the power to tax the citizens and spend that money the way they want to do it, including hiring more lobbyists. So you can't support this bill. You can't ban. You'll put me out of business. You'll put the community won't be able to hire me in the future, and I won't be able to take you to the Spurs games after we have steaks. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line of it. So banning taxpayer-funded lobbying, which is also one of the Republican Party's convention's potential 8 most important issues to knock out next session. So we'll talk about that in the next segment. RPT. Spent most of the week at the Republican Party of Texas State Convention. It is action-packed. There's a great debate, a few great debates and fissures going on among the party infrastructure, but it'll get resolved. There's a active chairman's race, and there also this effort to decide which of the 8 priorities the party is going to embed and embody most as they're leading. Here are our needs legislatively. And they're all the issues that you and I want. Probably 30 or 40 good issues are competing, and the delegates have been voting. I'm gonna save my 8. I bet there's, again, 18 that all merit it, but we all had to choose, and I chose mine. I'm a delegate to the convention this week, and also Politics with the Big Dogs had a booth and hosting all sorts of conservative activists. So I hope that we had an opportunity to visit this week, and I'll be interviewing more and more of the conservative activists from the party and playing those. It does take some time to produce these shows. And folks, we're just running out of time, so we're going to have to go and get into the details of the party convention and the things of consequence from it on next week's show. I also did a number of interviews, so we'll be able to bring those out and play those throughout the next couple of weeks. But we've got to do our obligatory Tepper Time. Remember, this is Carl Tepper, a state representative, moderate, kind of newer state representative from Lubbock area. Go along, get along, establishment, rhino, you label it. He's the guy. He got over $1 million from Texans for Lawsuit Reform to try to defeat and ultimately defeat in a runoff a constitutional conservative up there when the guy got elected. He's been complaining and going to meetings complaining. Anthony Holm has this radio show, and he's not telling people he's a trial lawyer. So I think all of you know I'm a trial lawyer. I've spoken about it many, many times. I also have a LLM in antitrust, so it's more that's a master's of law, and I do go to trial, and I do help people. It's fun. It's interesting. I haven't always done it, but I have the last several years, and it's one of the reasons that my being a lawyer and not just a lawyer, but a trial lawyer, that we talk about so many legal issues and constitutional and the color blindness of the constitutional mandate, even if that hasn't been followed until recently, right? When Harvard and Edward Bloom, who's been on the show in the past, Edward led the charge to sue Harvard and all of these other institutions on racial quotas and won. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, yes, that is racism on its face, and we're supposed to be a colorblind nation. And it's beautiful that we're getting back to it. So, yes, and one of the reasons that we talk about the laws in California in such depth about the voter fraud and the laws in California about the union activism. All of these are because I'm a 53-year-old attorney, and not just an attorney, but also a trial lawyer. So there's my obligatory Tepper Time. For anybody who's whining and saying it's unclear, Anthony is a lawyer. All right, guys. Moving on. We've got to close it down and wrap it up because we're running out of time. But thank you so much for your strong support of constitutional conservatism in Texas. And we also... Man, we've got to get into one of these shows, the debacle that is the funeral commission, this obscure little commission that has just been plagued with problems in Texas. Maybe we can get that on the next week's show. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for fighting. We shall overcome. We have overcome, and we are winning.
Thank you so much for joining us here at Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you go to politicswithbigdogs.com, sign up for our newsletter. Thank you for fighting for liberty. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.